Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Welcome to Round Hill Radio. I'm Leslie.
I'm Ed.
Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
So this was a topic I brought to the table because this is very much like this is how I'm feeling. And I wonder if other people are feeling it too. And I get the sense that
let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. So as things are starting to open up tiny bit by tiny bit, and as people are becoming fully vaccinated and, the chance of people being seriously ill is diminishing. These are all things for celebration.
Indeed. Yep.
I find myself resisting the idea of things going back to air quote normal, to the status quo. But even to the idea of just like the idea of a big social gathering makes me very anxious.
Right.
And I consider myself an extrovert. So I wonder how my introverted brethren and sisters are doing.
Like me?
Like you. Yes, like you. And, and so my understanding of introvert versus extrovert is that extroverts gain energy from social interactions and introverts are drained from social interactions. And then quiet time is a time to re-up your energy. Is that a fair place to start?
I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay. So just thinking about that and thinking about how we can be mindful of where kind of everybody is right now as things are starting to open up. I mean, I feel like it took me so long to adjust to this whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
That I kind of want to think about giving myself just as long to adjust to whatever is next,
right.
And I was wondering how you're feeling, where you are, and if any of our listeners are feeling the same way, you think?
Well, I'm really glad you raised this because I see references to it all over the place. I mean, there are a lot of articles online and in the papers as people are trying to figure out, I think just what you're saying, it took us a long time in many cases, right, to figure out how to deal with the pandemic. I mean, I'm thinking back to the first time I went to the grocery store, right after everything had started to shut down. What a time that was. And going into the grocery store, and it looked like a scene in a post-apocalyptic movie. And I thought, oh my gosh, all those movies I've been watching over the years, and now here it is. This is what it looks like. We're living it, right? Paper products flying out of the store, like who knows, So I think part of what I've been learning from people who write books on creating new habits is it takes 6 months to create a new habit, right? There's sort of a series of transitions you go through before that habit is embedded. So we formed habits, whether we wanted them or not. We did form new habits during the last 12 months. And I think we need to be thoughtful about ourselves going forward, because we don't want to just wrench ourselves back into what we thought we were doing 12 or 14 months ago. Some people have had such a miserable, horrifying, and nightmarish experience of the past 14 years. Of course, they like all of us, they've been ready to try to move beyond this as quickly as possible. There's that part, I think, in all of us. So I certainly appreciate that. On the other hand, some people have discovered new parts of themselves and their relationships with their loved ones or their relationship with nature that wasn't there. Those things weren't there 14 months ago. And what I'm hearing is they don't want to lose those qualities. If they were, suddenly transitioned to work out of their houses, they don't want to go back into their offices. They like being around their families more and eating lunch with their children or taking a walk outside. So I think you're raising a very important point. And I guess my question back to you, Leslie, is are you seeing enough reflective space in the public commons, that's addressing these issues? Or do you think that we're in just a headlong rush to return to quote unquote the old normal, that we're bypassing that time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I feel like I see, like you said, a lot of people who have had such a hard time and they just want to like shut the door on that time and move forward. Mm-hmm. And then other people who found something in that. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling the future will look somewhere in between those two, inclinations. Mm-hmm. I have not minded so much working from home. Teaching virtually in the last spring, was very interesting. And I think that's when I personally struggled the most, because I was in my house 24/7. And as the school opened in the fall, so I go teach, 4 days a week. And I think that's been very helpful. So I think I sort of found a balance in that time of like having some social interaction with my colleagues and seeing the kids, and also just being so inspired by their resiliency. Mm-hmm. Like those kids, they just aren't phased. Yep. I mean, right. I have a whole new routine of reminding them to wipe down the keys, sanitize their hands, fix their masks. Yeah. But they're really not. I was expecting, I think, more eye rolling about all of it. Like, I have to do this. I have to do this. But they've been like, all right, that's just what we do now.
They've rolled with it.
And I find a lot of sort of inspiration of like, well, that's life right now. So we'll just, they come in, they're like, do I need to wipe down the keys? They remind me now, which is very sweet. I'm like, oh yeah, you need to do that.
They're channeling you.
They're incredible. They're just incredible. And so I think, and then I think for so many months, there were people who were more resistant to the idea of what was going on, resistant to the idea of being what I consider very safe. Mm-hmm. And so I think I sort of have this slightly ingrained reaction to, if someone wants to come and stand close to me, I back away. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's in my mind for safety and a respect thing. Mm-hmm. And so, the idea of going to somebody, like giving them a hug, I'm a hugger, I'm a hugger, and I'm already like, oh, you're in my bubble. Why are you in my bubble? It's so interesting just how much a relatively short amount of time, obviously, I mean, this feels like a decade, but what a short amount of time can do to your kind of gut reactions to things.
Yes. I've heard people say they'll never shake anyone's hand again. I mean, they may feel differently about that 30 days from now, but there are people who are already thinking that, or they're not going to allow themselves to be hugged. They don't want that to be part of their future. Right. Well, one thing we've talked about off and on, I think, Leslie, during these past months is that, how we view the pandemic also depends so greatly on racial background, ethnic, background. All of those things have had a huge factor in how this pandemic has been experienced. Although, and also in the last few weeks, I just happened to have come across quite a few articles by introverts who are saying, if you're living in the United States of America, it's like the capital of extroversion, right? Yeah. We're just out there constantly. And so many people during the past 14 months feel like they have a different place on the planet, like they haven't had to be someone other than who they are. And as you say, if you're an introvert, you may find yourself in a lot of experiences that require you to be extroverted, but you need time to regroup. And now in the last last months, people haven't felt that quite as much. They've been able to sort of have a nice charge all the time. Yeah. So they're concerned about that. And the only real counsel I've heard for people in that regard is try to go as slowly as you can into the future. Don't let, to whatever extent is possible, don't allow yourself to be rushed. but try to hold your ground, and not lose that for the few. And I think for one's own mental well-being, as well as the health and success of our other social relationships, it's good if we can all understand that very clearly about who we are and what we need going forward. And I do think there's much more conversation now in our culture than has been the case for a long time about racial justice. It's really refreshing and to see that, and I'm very hopeful about that. And so I think that's going to be people, there are so many people of color who they don't want to go back to the old normal before the pandemic, right?
Right.
And so the one thing that's really interesting, so many people in our congregation just crave that experience of being back physically in our sanctuary. That's so important to them. And since we resumed in-person gatherings, that's meant the world to them. But I do know of people who have now also begun to appreciate having the online experience of worship. Some of those are folks who tune into us from other parts of the country, and I think no longer attend their local congregations, but now see our service as their main access to a worshiping community. So they likewise are feeling like they don't want to go back to what they experienced before. They're really enjoying something about this. And I have to say, for a lot of people, it's given a lot of people Sunday morning. They've said, I like walking around my neighborhood on Sunday morning, or taking a nice long leisurely walk through the woods, or resting, whatever. And then they tune into the service at 6:00 on Sunday night instead, or watch it in pieces through the week. So they don't want to go back to the old normal either. And that's what's going to be so fascinating. How can we hold things together while we're doing all of that, having all those different conversations? That's going to be challenging.
Yeah, it was wild when we had paused in-person worship, and I didn't have to go, I did air quotes for our audio audience, have to go to church, work on Sunday morning, because I haven't, other than a Sunday off here or there and for vacation, I haven't had a Sunday off in like 20 years that was just like, I have a Sunday morning?
How novel.
How novel. It was actually funny because I had a family member ask me just yesterday, so you work every Sunday morning? I'm like, that is how that works. Yes, that is how that works. Yeah, you get used to it. It's okay. It's okay.
You have a job title of, director of music. There's an asterisk. It says you will never see Sunday morning again outside of it.
No, it's such a funny thing. It's fine. Honestly, I like it because, I don't work on Fridays, and Fridays are such a great day for running errands. I was out running errands. This is such a stupid story, but I was running errands on Saturday, and I was like, this is why I don't do a normal weekend, because everyone else is doing a normal weekend. So it's a little countercultural in a way I enjoy.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about what you were saying about, like, I think there's an element of we have an opportunity to pick and choose as a society what we want to keep from now and what we want to go back to, what we want to, select from before. And you've alluded to this a couple times, but I think our relationship with nature, with being outdoors, has really been strengthened and transformed by this time. I mean, I think of, all the people who have left New York City to move up to the burbs where we are here, and other places, and how, for so long being outside is safer in a social situation than being indoors. And I think that's really created a stronger appreciation of nature.
Yeah, I agree. I remember back during the very early weeks of the pandemic when New York was shutting down, the noise level, of course, dropped ferociously. And people could hear the sounds of nature in the city. I mean, there's a lot of nature in New York City, right? Not just Central Park, but in so many other ways. And suddenly people could reconnect with that and loved it. And in some cities across the world where the pandemic had involved, just the entire shutting down of the cities, people really were quarantined, locked down in their homes, wild animals started to come and to visit the cities, so suddenly people were seeing all of these creatures walking around the city in a way that they hadn't seen that before. But I completely agree that there's something about this time that has opened us back up to the world of nature. And that's very, very important. And that actually comes at a very good time, because we're living at a moment in history when it's absolutely crucial that we understand our connection to nature and how important it is to nurture that and cultivate it. And I have felt for years that one of the main reasons why people are not more involved in a strong creative response to climate change is because actually we don't feel invested in nature. We don't have a connection with it. We don't love it necessarily. And so this past 14 months has kind of forced people to get back outside, because, as you say, it's one of the few safe places you could be if you weren't locked down in your own home. And even if you were experiencing it through a mask, at least you were experiencing it. It's made me actually think about how we view nature theologically. I have a friend who describes himself as a panentheist. So this is your theological word for the week.
I love a good word.
Panentheist. So pantheism is this very ancient idea that God actually, or the divine, is actually housed in the things of nature.
Okay.
So it's right that nature is just shot through and through with the divine. Panentheism is the idea that the divine communicates through nature, revealed through nature, but is not housed in it. And so I think a lot of, certainly a lot of my colleagues would describe themselves as panentheists. And so now we're looking out at the world around us and finding that wonderful connection that hadn't been there for folks. And I think that's been really, really great. And especially, oh my goodness, I think about what parents have had to deal with, teachers, so many, all medical care workers in these past months. Being closer to nature, especially as we get close to summer, can be a real healing time, I think, for a lot of people. And I hope that will be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the winter, I sort of think there was the phases of it. Last summer was its own sort of time. And then as we went into winter, I know a lot of us were concerned because we couldn't have our outdoor gatherings in the same way.
Yeah.
And now that things are opening back up in terms of the weather, my apologies for any sniffling, by the way. Allergies.
It's that season.
Allergies in Connecticut right now are like Georgia levels, guys.
Off the charts, yes. I have heard that.
I realize that's a very personal reference, but it's Georgia levels for me, which is why I don't live in Georgia anymore. But
I know. I've heard that it's a very bad year for allergies. Yeah.
It's not great. Yeah. But it's okay. We're getting through. It means good, sunshine and warm weather is coming. So
yes.
But yeah, the opportunity to be outside again and just spend time outside is such a healing thing. And as we, like you say, I think nature playing such a strong role in our faith, and then having that connection in our mind of that when you're sitting in nature and you just pause and take a minute and take in just what feels like a miracle to me, It's just like, how is it so beautiful and vibrant, and like you said, the different sounds and the leaf blowers notwithstanding.
The pain of my existence.
It's rough. But, if I look out my window here, I have a window that I try to avoid because of the light, but I have my little seedlings that I grew from tiny little seeds, which is I have a black thumb, so that feels like a miracle. I can see hot pink azaleas. I can see the green grass and trees. And it's like, to me, that feels so innately divine. And I think that I have to stop, I have to stop and take a beat and appreciate it.
Yes.
And I think this whole time of the pandemic has really forced me to do that, because I very much subscribed to the cult of busyness. For so many years. I was just always going and going and going. And it really forced me to sit still and like read a book in the garden.
Oh, wow.
I know. And it's been a gift. And it also feels, I think it's hard to look back at such a difficult time for so many millions of people and say anything like that is a gift. But I think holding those two, that dichotomy, is kind of what we have to do to move forward.
Right.
That's how it feels to me.
Well, I would love to put together the question you started asking at the beginning, which was, what do we want to savor from this time? What's worth savoring? There are many things we want to discard, but there are some things that are worth holding on to. And what are they? And actually, it's being out in nature and taking a walk that can help us to kind of ruminate on that. And, I so often during this past year, I have thought of those who live in very large apartment buildings in urban areas and, who haven't been able to get out. And I thought how incredibly challenging that must have been for them. And, but I'm even hopeful, in those areas where that kind of population density exists and people are living very, very close to one another, maybe don't have the same access, but that even there, people are still able to get out somewhat. Many years ago, I had a friend who was a landscape architect, and he led a tour through New York City to show us how it was possible to get very close to nature in the city. And he walked us from the Upper West Side all the way down to Midtown and, points in between. And it was stunning to see how many opportunities there were to interact with natural elements during that time. And we never even went to Central Park. These were other places. So I think nature can play a very, very large role for us wherever we are. And again, as you're showing it right by your window, even to have some seedlings, something that we're growing or nurturing inside can be very, very important. When my mother was much less mobile towards the end of her life, she always had her houseplants. She couldn't really get out in the same way, but that was a huge part of her life, just kind of tending them. They blossomed, it gave her joy. And I think that we don't want to lose that connection. And we want to use, I think, the example of nature to think about how we can make the world a better place by bringing forward the things we learned during the pandemic and are still learning from it.
Absolutely. So this very much feels like the start of a conversation that I know will keep going through our podcast and through our different ways to interact with us. Again, if you'd love to be part of our conversation, we encourage you to send us an email to podcast@roundhillcommunitychurch.org and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to really appreciate that. That really helps us out. So thank you, Ed, for this time, and we will be back here next week.
Thank you, Leslie. Blessings.
Thanks for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillcommunitychurch.org.